hope you're having a great Friday and everything's going well. We're going to continue in our study about preparing for victory. I know this is normally our Sunday night service, but since we didn't have one this last Sunday, I'm going to do this one to kind of catch us up. So this is going to be in Nehemiah 2, and we're going to do 13 through 16. As we talk about preparing for victory, and this message that God kind of laid upon my heart is that our church needs to prepare for victory in these crazy times. Also, it's talking about us as Christians need to prepare for our victory in these crazy times. And God is growing our church through this situation. We had 134 people Sunday morning for our Sunday morning Easter service. It was a great time, great turnout. We even made the Live 5 News at 11 o'clock. If you look on Facebook, you can find that link to where we made the news, because we are growing in the midst of COVID-19, which is a fantastic testament to our people of our church, fantastic testament to our church being willing to think outside the box to continue to minister. But through this process, I want us to continue to prepare for the victory that's going to come once this is all passed, and to set ourselves up and to set our church up for victory in what others might consider a bad situation or a crazy time. And last time we met together, we talked about repairing our perspective, that Nehemiah had to change his perspective. He could no longer be the cupbearer of the king to rebuild the wall, and his perspective had to then match God's perspective. And how in life, when we prepare for a victory, when we prepare to be victorious in God's kingdom, we do that by repairing our perspective. We can't take that human perspective anymore. Today, what we're going to talk about is the second portion, the second part of preparing for victory, and that is realizing your predicament, realizing where you're at. Because you have to know your predicament in life in order to figure out how to progress in life. And we're going to see here that Nehemiah had to get down and realize exactly what predicament he was in order to move forward with a plan that God had for his life. And as Christians, when we prepare for victory in our lives, we have to understand where we're at. We have to understand exactly where we are. You know, some of the hardest things for Christians to do is to self-analyze our Christian walk. It's easy for us to judge our brother and sister's walk or see where they're fallible or see where they've fallen down. But it's very hard for us as Christians to evaluate ourselves. It's very hard for us to look in the mirror and see where our shortcomings are, or to see where the sin in our life that we can't get rid of is killing us, or where we're not doing all that we can for the kingdom of God. And it can cause us problems in preparing for victory because we can't get it going because of where we're at. And Nehemiah realized that he had to fix his perspective and look at things through God's eyes. But then he had to realize that he had to put boots on the ground and evaluate the predicament that he now found himself in. Because if he could not evaluate the predicament, he could not formulate a plan to be successful. In verse 13, I'm going to read 13 through 16. It says this: "So I went out at night by the valley gate in the direction of Dragon's Well, and on the refuse gate, inspecting the walls of Jerusalem, which were broken down, and its gates, which were consumed by fire." So right off the bat, we see that he gets down and begins to walk among the ruins of Jerusalem. And the first thing he comes to is the gates have been torn down and the gates have been burned, symbolizing that there was nothing to stop anybody from coming and going, or anything from coming and going into Jerusalem. A lot of times in life, we get to a point where we are broken down and we'll let anything come in and out of our homes, anything to come in and out of our lives, in and out of our minds. I think of the stuff that we look at and we see on a daily basis through advertisement or through shows that we choose to watch, the things that we allow come and go in our minds through our ears, through the music we listen to, or the things that we podcast that we allow to enter into our mind. And sometimes when we have torn down gates and we're decimated that way, we allow anything to come and go in our lives, and it's not good. And here Jerusalem's walls were torn down so anybody could come freely and go freely. He says, then I passed on the fountain gate in the king's pool, but there was no place for my mount to pass. So it was so torn up and so dilapidated that the horse could not even get through this portion of the wall. Rubble had begun stacked upon rubble, the weight of that. Sometimes as Christians, we allow the weight of our sin to stack up on us so that we cannot walk and we can't move forward in the kingdom and we can't do anything because we are weighed down. The path is blocked by our sin. The path is blocked by the things that we refuse to do in life. Verse 15, he says, so I went up at night by the ravine and inspected the wall. Then I entered the valley gate again and returned. So we see here that he went and made a physical inspection of the destruction of Jerusalem. And if we remember, Jerusalem was destroyed because the people had turned their backs on God. And they had turned their backs on God, and since that happened, their whole city, everything that they had stood for had been destroyed. People could enter and go and come through the gates. There was stuff stacked up as desolation just rocked that city. And when I began to prepare this, and we began to talk about preparing for our victory, I think sometimes in life we are hindered by the destruction in our lives. The destruction that we have allowed because we don't want to fully follow God. We don't want to fully have that relationship with God. And because we don't want to fully have that relationship with God, we turn our back on Him and instead turn our face to the idols and to the things of this world that seem to make us happy. And when we change that perspective and we change that plan for our lives, God's plan for our lives, suddenly we find ourselves destroying that which God had built. That protection that God surrounded us with has suddenly been destroyed by our choice to walk away from Him. Our gates of our city that had been protected by Christ, that God hampers things from coming into our lives, now suddenly they're open because we have turned our perspective from God. So until we realize our predicament, we can never plan for our future. Meaning that we can see through God's eyes the desolation that is in our lives. The desolation that might be our own making. The desolation that might be the making of someone that we know that is influencing our lives. The desolation of our mission to serve God the way we want to serve God, that we're omitting service to Him. And those things destroy us spiritually. And in order to prepare for victory, we got to understand where we're at. We got to understand where we're deficient. So we see that Nehemiah begins to walk through the city and through the ruins so he can evaluate where the help and where the work needs to start. In your own personal life, as you prepare for victory, in our church's situation, as we prepare for Maple Cane to be victorious, not only do we have to repair our perspective of who God is, but we also have to realize the predicament we're in. We have to look at our lives and see where we're deficient. We have to look at our church and see where it's deficient. We have to get down and begin to walk through the desolation which is our lives and find the areas of weakness so that we can rebuild our defenses and become a strong church and a strong people for God. You might say, Blake, how does that look? Well, in our own spiritual lives, we might be deficient in our Bible study. So the first part we might need to do to repair our lives is to get in the Word. We might need to be deficient in our prayer lives. So the first place we need to fix our predicament is in our prayer life and our spending time talking to God. We might be deficient in God's told us to do something and we refuse to do it because we're not willing to walk by faith. So we might be deficient in our faith. And that might be where we need to start. All Christians have some weakness in their life that they need to identify and begin to fix so that we can prepare a plan to be victorious. In our churches, how could that look? Maybe there's a ministry that our church is called to do that we have to walk by faith. It might be a situation where God is calling us as a church to band together and do something greater than what we think we're capable of doing. It might be a situation where we have to fix things in our church so that we're reaching people outside the walls. It's looking at our predicament, finding our weaknesses, and then implementing God's plan in our life so that we can prepare for the victory that he says we're going to have. So what do? Where do we go? Well, first we had to change our perspective to be that of God's, and now we have to look at our predicament. We have to analyze where our shortfalls are, where we're falling short of the goals for God's purpose in our lives, and begin to fix those so God can give us the plan to prepare for victory. Because we got to identify our predicament before we can ever come up with a plan. And then once we see where we're at, once we see where we're deficient, once we see where we have to repair the walls of our life, or repair the walls of our church, or repair those things that have collapsed and fallen down, or get rid of those things that we're allowing to come and go in our lives that are causing destruction. We have to see those areas, then we have to allow God's plan in our life to fix those weaknesses so that we can prepare for God's victory. So we have to grow in him. It's all about a relationship. It's all about growing closer to God, having God's eyes, and then also having God's heart, and seeing that he is the most important thing in our lives. The city of Jerusalem was protected by its walls. We're protected by the walls that God places around our lives. And in this time, now more than ever, we need to begin to realize our predicament and fix our weaknesses so we can fulfill God's plan for our lives. Dear Heavenly Father, God, I thank you for another day. Lord, I pray and ask, Lord, that you will help us to be able to analyze the predicaments we find ourselves in. Not only to analyze those predicaments, Lord, but give us a plan to repair the weaknesses that are within us. Give us that strength, God. Help us to grow closer to you as we prepare for victory. In your precious and powerful name I pray, God.